The story of the cloud and the fire from Numbers chapter 9, verses 15 to 23, is a powerful reminder of God's constant presence and guidance for the Israelites during their journey through the wilderness. It highlights how God used visible signs, a cloud by day and fire by night, to lead and protect his people as they move toward the promised land. Let's explore this story in depth. After the Israelites had been delivered from slavery in Egypt, they were on their way to the promised land. But the journey through the wilderness was long and difficult. During this time, God's presence was visibly with them in the form of a cloud and fire. This story takes place after the construction of the tabernacle, the sacred tent where God would dwell among his people. The tabernacle was at the center of the Israelite camp and was where they worshipped God and made offerings. It symbolized God's dwelling with his people. From the moment the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered it. This cloud was no ordinary cloud. It was the visible manifestation of God's presence. The cloud rested over the tabernacle by day, and at night it appeared as a pillar of fire. This fire provided light in the dark and was a reminder of God's protective presence. The cloud and fire were not just signs of God's presence, they were also his way of guiding the Israelites. Whenever the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, it was a signal for the Israelites to break camp and set out on their journey. When the cloud remained over the tabernacle, the Israelites stayed where they were. Whether the cloud remained for just a day, a week, a month, or even longer, the Israelites did not move unless the cloud lifted. The cloud first appears after the completion of the tabernacle. Numbers chapter 9, verse 15 describes it. On the day the tabernacle, the tent of the covenant law, was set up, the cloud covered it. From evening till morning, the cloud above the tabernacle looked like fire. This cloud represented the Shekinah glory, the visible glory of God dwelling among his people. The cloud had a dual form. By day it appeared as a cloud, and by night as a glowing fire. The Israelites would follow the cloud, which was a clear and visible guide for when to move and when to stay. Numbers chapter 9 verse 17 says, "Whenever the cloud lifted from above the tent, the Israelites set out. Wherever the cloud settled, the Israelites encamped." This was how God directed their movements. They couldn't rely on their own wisdom or timing. They had to wait on God's signal. The cloud was a daily reminder of God's active role in their lives, teaching them patience and dependence on him. One remarkable aspect of this guidance was that the Israelites never knew how long they would stay in one place or how far they would travel. Numbers chapter 9 verse 22 explains, "Whether the cloud stayed over the tabernacle for 2 days or a month or a year, the Israelites would remain in camp and not set out, but when it lifted, they would set out." This uncertainty required the Israelites to trust God fully. They could not make their own plans, but had to submit to God's timing and direction. It was a test of faith and obedience. The constant movement of the Israelites depended entirely on the cloud. Sometimes they might settle for an extended period, and other times they might move after just a short stay. There was no fixed schedule, and this was a test of their faith. Their journey was not based on human wisdom, but was directed by the divine presence of God. Numbers chapter 9 verse 23 summarizes this. "At the Lord's command they encamped, and at the Lord's command they set out. They obeyed the Lord's order in accordance with his command through Moses." The purpose of the cloud and fire. The cloud and fire had multiple purposes. God's guidance. It showed the Israelites when to move and when to stay. They had to follow God's timing and trust in his direction, God's presence. The cloud and fire were visible symbols of God's presence. The Israelites could see that God was with them day and night. This provided them with assurance and confidence as they journeyed through the wilderness. Protection. The cloud provided shade during the scorching heat of the desert day, and the fire gave light and warmth during the cold nights. God was not only spiritually guiding them, but also providing physical protection and comfort, a test of obedience. The cloud required the Israelites to obey without question. They couldn't decide on their own when to go or when to stay. They had to wait on God's signal. This built their faith and reliance on God. Spiritual significance and lessons. God's constant presence. Just as God was visibly present with the Israelites through the cloud and fire, He is always with His people. Though we may not have a physical cloud or fire, God's presence is with us through the Holy Spirit. This story reminds us that we are never alone, and God is always guiding us, even when we cannot see the full picture. Trusting in God's timing. The Israelites had to learn patience and reliance on God's timing. They couldn't rush ahead or lag behind, they had to follow God's lead. In our own lives, we are often called to wait on God's timing, even when it's difficult to understand or when we want to take matters into our own hands. God's protection and provision. The cloud and fire provided physical protection and guidance. In the same way, God provides for our needs, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual. We can trust that He knows what we need and when we need it. Obedience to God. The Israelites' journey required complete obedience to God's commands. They moved when He said to move and stayed when He said to stay. This story teaches us that obedience to God is key to walking in His will and experiencing His blessings. Faith in uncertainty. The Israelites never knew how long they would stay in one place or when they would move next. This uncertainty forced them to rely completely on God. In our own lives, we often face uncertainty, but like the Israelites, we are called to trust in God's plan and direction, even when the future is unclear. The story of the cloud and fire is a beautiful representation of God's unwavering presence and guidance in the lives of His people. It teaches us the importance of trusting in God's timing, relying on His direction, and obeying His commands. Just as the Israelites followed the cloud and fire, we too are called to follow God's guidance in our daily lives, trusting that He is leading us step by step toward His plans for us. We need to trust in Him and be patient, because He always knows what's best for you way before you do. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up and share. And if you haven't already, come on over and join our family by subscribing to our channel. May God bless you and all your endeavors. Thank you for watching.